Hello, it's Adrian Salbucci from Argentina once again. Today I'd like to talk to you about two less known false flag attacks that occurred in my country, Argentina, in my city, Buenos Aires. Since time immemorial, man has hunted and preyed upon animals in the forest and in the jungle for his own food, for his own family, for his own survival. A good hunter does not need to see the animal all the time. He knows when he's close by. How does he know? There are signs. Broken twigs here, droppings there, a dead rodent or a bird lying by the path, paw marks, and a myriad of other telltale signs. A specific odor. And when it comes to odors, we all know that something smells very rotten in this New World Order. Especially since the US attacks of 9/11, the London 7th July 2005 attacks, and several others. We had Charlie Sheen trying to awaken President Obama to realize what's happening, but he said, "Oh, Charlie, you've only got 5 minutes," and he just took the files and probably never looked at them. Clearly, there is somebody way above Obama that won't let him do anything about it. But I'd like to share with you two other false flag attacks, probably false flag attacks, that occurred in Argentina in 1992 and 1994, which in a way help to understand that there is a whole system behind this. There is sort of like a fingerprint, as we call them. We suffered the two worst terrorist attacks in March 1992 and in July 1994. The first one demolished the Israeli embassy in downtown Buenos Aires with about 40-50 people killed. And the second attack demolished the headquarters of the AMIA and DAIA, Jewish mutual organizations, killing 86 people. Both attacks took place during the administration of former President Carlos Menem, who maintained the fullest alignment you can possibly imagine with the United States, the United Kingdom, and the State of Israel. As with 9/11 and 7th July in London, the official story is that both of these attacks were perpetrated by Islamic terrorists, and in our case, what they did was drive car bombs into both central Buenos Aires buildings. Of course, who did it? Who done it? Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, Syria, the usual story. Let's look first at the embassy, the attack of the Israeli embassy in March 1994. This case has tended to disappear from the media because the evidence is too damning against those who really perpetrated. It's very clear that on that terrible morning in March 1992, what exploded was not a car bomb going by the street Arroyo and Suipacha in Buenos Aires, but that the explosion occurred inside the embassy building. Why? Because of the blast patterns that show that the shock wave came from inside out. The broken glass in the buildings in the area and in the facades of surrounding buildings show that the epicenter was inside the embassy. A short video that a passerby happened to take shows a mushroom cloud, which is typical of an internal explosion. Experts from the National Engineering Academy that were summoned by the Argentine court investigating this case came to the conclusion that the blast occurred inside the embassy. It was so conflicting and so difficult that one of our Supreme Court judges ended up having a verbal row with the then Israeli ambassador in Argentina, Aviram. In fact, many other odd things occurred regarding the embassy explosion. The surveillance cameras that should have taken a photograph of the car bomb didn't work that day. The ambassador himself luckily escaped being killed because he happened to go down around the corner to go have a coffee. The building plans of the embassy at the Argentine municipality, Buenos Aires municipality, disappeared. Hardly anyone talks about this specific case anymore, especially the Israelis. Let's look at the AMIA, that's the Jewish Mutual Association, which was blown up in July 1994. Here matters are very different. It too was allegedly blown up in exactly the same way on 14th July 1994. When that terrible event occurred, President Menem immediately requested experts to assist with the forensic investigations from the United States and from the State of Israel. Both willingly obliged. The Israelis went so far as to plant their flag of the State of Israel on the rubble of the AMIA in downtown Buenos Aires. Contrary to the embassy, this was strictly an Argentine affair. It was a private building in Buenos Aires under Argentine jurisdiction, killing Argentinian citizens. Nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with the United States, with any foreign power actually. Very quickly the myth was elaborated, propagated, that this was done by Islamic terrorists, that it was an anti-Semitic attack against the Jews in Argentina and elsewhere, that all things pointed to Syria, to Iran, to Hezbollah. A frame-up story was quickly assembled of a used car, a shady person, or a rather funny guy, called Carlos Tejeldin, who supposedly sold a white Renault Trafic, that's the name brand, van, to a local group of terrorists, in which the intermediary were two local Argentinian citizens of Syrian Lebanese descent by the name of Kanure Edul, who are still today being investigated, 16 years later. The van was supposedly loaded with explosives. It drove by the headquarters of the AMIA on Pasteur Street in Buenos Aires City, in downtown Buenos Aires, which is the Jewish quarter of our city. It rammed into the AMIA and blew it up. To help the myth evolve, an Israeli army officer who was looking around in the rubble very conveniently showed up saying that, hey, look what I found. He found a piece of the alleged van's motor, which happened to carry the manufacturer's serial number on it. This was sent to the local Renault car plant, who confirmed that, yes, this belongs to a Renault Trafic van. A similar stroke of luck, you will remember, the FBI had in the World Trade Center rubble, where they found intact the passport of one Mohammed Atta, who was the leader of, the alleged leader of the Islamic terrorist group that hijacked the American Airlines flight ramming into World Trade Center Tower 1. More than 15 years have gone by, and the investigation of the AMIA still continues, riddled with corruption, riddled with the most incredible things you can possibly imagine. It has gone through 7 different federal courts. The file consists of over 1 million pages in God knows how many volumes. A special sector has been opened inside the Argentine courts, and the local and international Zionist organizations permanently whip up a huge media frenzy, maintaining permanent pressure on the government, maintaining permanent memory alive with commemorative events, attacks, eyewitness reports, books, articles, TV, radio, the lot, the whole thing. Indeed, it still is going. After both attacks, in actual fact, the Argentine authorities had to set up special protection for all Jewish buildings throughout Argentina. Not only embassies, but associations, mutual associations, sports clubs, schools, rabbinical seminars, synagogues. All of this special security was paid for, and still is being paid for, the Argentine taxpayer, where we have terrible insecurity on our streets and our police just cannot cope, and yet a part of our police is blocked up into defending the physical interests of a very tiny community. No other community in Argentina enjoys this. Why do I say very tiny? Because according to official figures from, for example, the Jewish Virtual Library or the State of Israel, or even the local organizations, Zionist and Jewish organizations in Argentina, there are only 200,000 Jews living in Argentina. We are 40 million people. That means it's only 0.5% of our population. And yet for 0.5% of our population, a whole scheme, very complex, very expensive, has been set up. One of the very worst federal judges to act on this case of the AMIA, a cowardly and weak-spirited man by the name of Juan José Galeano, went so far as to authorize that the court participate in a crime whereby Mr. Tejeldin, the guy who allegedly sold this Renault van, who was in jail, was given $400,000 as a kickback so that he would falsely accuse the Buenos Aires Province Police Department of involvement in the attack. Why? Because part of the myth required the Buenos Aires Province Police Department to participate, or some people in them, because it's well known in my country that this specific police group have a very bad press. They have been violent. They have done a lot of repressive things, so they already are badly seen, or especially at that time. And accusing several officers in the Buenos Aires Province Police would allow them to complete or round off the local connection, which would lead to Syria, which would lead to Hezbollah, which would lead to Iran. Those $400,000 kickback, officially approved by an Argentine judge, were generated by one of these two organizations, the DAIA, the Asociaciones Israelitas Argentinas, which at that time was presided by Mr. Rubén Baraja, who was the president from 1991 to 1998, who was later jailed because he too had a bank, Banco Mayo, which went fraudulently bankrupt and which stole the funds of mostly Jewish citizens in Argentina. Shall we say, Rubén Baraja is our own local version of Bernie Madoff on a much smaller scale. And this Rubén Baraja, just so that we understand how these networks work, in 1996, 1997, he was part of Paul Volcker. Remember Paul Volcker, the governor of the Federal Reserve before Alan Greenspan? He had set up a committee of eminent people, eminent persons, to investigate the Swiss banks for having kept money belonging to Jews during the Second World War, and they ended up piping up and paying Jewish Zionist organizations $1.4 billion. Well, Mr. Baraja was one of those eminent persons, together with Ronald Lauder, the billionaire, together with Israel Singer, the Secretary General of the World Jewish Council. We'll get back to Mr. Israel Singer in a few minutes. Clearly, birds of a feather flock together. And there you have Mr. Baraja, who provided the money for the kickback so that a court would be able to falsely accuse an entire institution and foreign countries of participating in this dreadful terrorist attack that affected Argentina. Local Zionist organizations like the AMIA itself, the DAIA, the Argentine Zionist Organization, the Israeli Embassy, the United States Embassy, major media outlets insist on blaming Iran, Hezbollah, and other Islamic organizations and countries. A short time after the attack, local journalist Jorge Lanata made an extensive investigation, and he found that there was absolutely no witness who was on the street on that day that recalls seeing a Renault van, that recalls seeing a Renault van go by, and much less that recalls a Renault van ramming into the building and blowing it up. You see, they need the van to exist no matter what, because if it doesn't exist, then this would lead to a totally different scenario. And it ties in marvelously with what at that time, the scenario I'm going to tell you about, were the ongoing internal fights in the State of Israel itself and between different sectors of the Zionist organizations. You had the left-wingers with the Labour government, when Labour was aiming at some sort of peace agreement with the Palestinians. You remember the Madrid Conference, the Oslo Accords, and so forth. And you had the ultra-right-wing fanatic Nazis in the Likud and later in the Kadima and the Israeli settler movements. I'm talking about your Ariel Sharons, your Avigdor Liebermans, and Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, who was Prime Minister in the 1990s and is again Prime Minister of the State of Israel, all naturally supported by the United States of America. An Argentine investigator by the name of Norberto Ceresole prepared a brief timeline that lets you understand why the AMIA attack of July 1994 fits in so perfectly with the internal fights within the State of Israel. He said, look at this. In 1991-1992, the Madrid Peace Conference started, where we started talking about giving the Palestinians a state, formally a state, and already a group, a ultra-right-wing group, the Kach group, started carrying out a series of attacks within Israel. 17 March 1992, the Israeli embassy is blown up in Buenos Aires, and Israeli negotiators were meeting at that time to start to see how they can go forward with the peace agreements. Luckily, they went down to have coffee themselves too, so they were not killed. 13 June 1992, General Yitzhak Rabin from the Labour Party was elected Prime Minister of Israel, and amongst the other things that he did, he totally revamped the Shin Bet, which is one of the internal security forces in the State of Israel, who's supposed to take care of public officers in Israel and public Israeli buildings abroad. He totally revamped Shin Bet and gave it the mandate to investigate the settlers groups within Israel who were becoming increasingly violent and very well armed. In 1992 and 1993, Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, formally negotiate and recognize each other. This was Yitzhak Rabin's merit. You all remember when Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, with Bill Clinton behind them, shook hands. Rabin wasn't very happy, but at least he was doing his best to try and see if Israel could overcome or come to peace with the Palestinians. That's when all the attacks started in Israel again against the Labour government. 25th February 1994. Now I don't know how many of you remember this, but an American Jew by the name of Baruch Goldstein went to Hebron in Israel, and whilst a large group of Muslims were at prayer in a Hebron mosque, he took out a machine gun, started firing, and killed 40 Muslims whilst they were praying. The question is, how did he get through very thick security, Israeli security? He got through somehow. Somebody must have winked an eye at him. He was killed in that by the Palestinians in that terrible attack, and yet his tomb in Israel is a place of worship for the settler movement in Israel. February and March 1994, the Cairo agreements start fixing the borders for Gaza and for Jericho. The peace movement and the giving to the Palestinians their own state keeps moving forward. 1st July 1994, after 27 years in exile, Yasser Arafat returns to Palestine. 18th July 1994, oh surprise, the explosion in Buenos Aires city of the AMIA Jewish Mutual Organization, which at that time was pro-labor. The right-wingers definitely didn't like them. And when does this whole dreadful process of internal fights in the state of Israel come to a head? 14 months after the attack against the AMIA, when on 4th November 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin is assassinated during a public event in the streets of Israel by a university student by the name of Yigal Amir, who was linked to Shin Bet and who was linked to the settler movement, ultra-right-wing activist. The Israeli Shamgar Commission, who has investigated the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin, concluded that Shin Bet was implicated in the assassination, even if by omission, but they had a responsibility. After this, after the death of Rabin, I think Shimon Peres stayed on for a couple of months, but labor was ousted, and from 1996, 1997 onwards, power in Israel, political power, has been in the hands of the Likud, the Kadima, and now again the Likud, ultra right-wing nationalist parties, fundamentalists, racist parties. That's why, since then, Israel, the United States, and the Zionist organizations insist permanently that the AMIA explosion had to be done by Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah. They insist that there was a car bomb, even though no car bomb was ever found. They need to accuse Syria, and notably Iran, which country, Israel and the United States, are desperate to put together now a case so that they can have an excuse to unilaterally attack Iran, especially now that the atomic program, the nuclear program, the parts don't fit so well. All Argentinian governments since then have bowed down to the United States, to the State of Israel, and to Zionist organizations. President Nestor Carlos Kirchner and his wife, who is now the president, who have both usurped power through the use of badly received money, kickbacks, public money stolen by them, have been totally functional to the Zionists and to their objectives since May 2003 when they came to power. And look at this. On 22nd September 2006, then President Nestor Kirchner was in New York City to address the United Nations General Assembly. There was a private, secret meeting at the Waldorf Astoria where then President Nestor Kirchner participated. His wife, at that time First Lady, today the present President of Argentina, Cristina Kirchner, participated. And the foreign minister at that time, and also today, Jorge Tayana, participated. And they met with the key Zionist organizations, the World Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee, the B'nai B'rith Masonic Lodge, the Anti-Defamation League, and they reached some sort of secret agreement. We don't know what it was, but in October 2006, just a couple of weeks later, then President Kirchner sends public prosecutors Alberto Nisman and Martínez Burgos to the United States to meet with CIA and Mossad authorities. Upon their return to and they met with the key Zionist organizations, the World Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee, the B'nai B'rith Masonic Lodge, the Anti-Defamation League, and they reached some sort of secret agreement. We don't know what it was, but in October 2006, just a couple of weeks later, then President Kirchner sends public prosecutors Alberto Nisman and Martínez Burgos to the United States to meet with CIA and Mossad authorities. Upon their return to Argentina, these two gentlemen, prosecutors Nisman and Martínez Burgos, immediately accused Iran, through their former president Mohammad Rafsanjani and 7 of his key government officers, of being responsible of having planned and financed the attack against the AMIA through Hezbollah. Local judge Canicova Corral, who today is hearing this case, immediately obliged and said, yes, of course, naturally. When that was made public, the political director and secretary general of the World Jewish Council, Rabbi Israel Singer, the same one that sat with Paul Volcker and the president of the Daya, Mr. Rubén Baraja, in this group of eminent persons who were supposed to investigate the Swiss banks, said, Rabbi Israel Singer at that time, that what the Kirchners were doing was, quote, confirmation that they were honoring the commitment they took up during that secret meeting in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City on 22nd September 2006. What commitment? What did they agree? What was the reason they agreed? In exchange for what? All we see today is a full-scale cover-up of the truth by Nestor Kirchner and his government. The consequences for Argentina have been very severe for decades now. We have all but broken off diplomatic relations with Iran. We stopped trading with them for years. We not only insulted the Republic of Iran, but we have also insulted the Muslim world as a whole. And we have aligned ourselves unconditionally with the geopolitical interests and objectives of the United States and the State of Israel in the Middle East. Because you see, the AMIA and the Daya are part of the global Jewish Zionist power network. For example, the American Jewish Congress describes the AMIA as their international partner as part of this international network. AMIA's mission statement says that one of its key objectives is to, quote, strengthen ties with the State of Israel, foreign power. Daya's mission statement includes, quote, strengthening ties with Israel and ratifying Israel's condition as the spiritual center of Jewish life. These are not Argentinian organizations. These are organizations working for a foreign power, which is at permanent war and is now looking for war against Iran, and which is committing genocide against the Palestinians whose territory they stole over 60 years ago. Clearly, AMIA and Daya are two lobbies in Argentina. They work for Israel, just as AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, does in the United States of America. They interfere with foreign policy, and they have the clout to do it. Because if the Zionist organizations can change, can turn American foreign policy to favor the State of Israel, don't you think they can do the same thing in Argentina? Local lawyer Juan Gabriel Lavaque is a very well-known local lawyer from the Peronist Party, is the defense attorney for these two gentlemen, Canure Edul, who are permanently being accused of having been involved, although there's not a shred of evidence, with this as the go-betweens for this white traffic van that is not appearing anywhere. He recently asked the public prosecutor Alberto Nisman, in representation of his client, that the case against his clients, and even the case against Iran, totally depended on finding out whether that Renault Trafic white van existed or not. Especially since a court-appointed expert, border police officer Osvaldo Laborda, brushed the problem away, because no parts were really found of this white Trafic van, brushed it away by officially stating that the remains of the van could not be found because they had been buried by the explosion on that terrible morning in 14th July 1994. Dr. Lavaque therefore asked the prosecutor, Mr. Niesman, to dig 4 meters down at the place of the explosion, the alleged explosion, so that we could know once and for all whether the van ever existed at all. Naturally, prosecutor Alberto Nisman said, no way. Alberto Nisman, sorry, said no way. Judge Canicova Corral, who is here in the case, said no way. The Kirchners and the local media all looked the other way. And Alberto Nisman, the public prosecutor, had his way. Interesting to note that in 2007, Special Prosecutor Alberto Nisman was invited to attend the annual meeting of the American Jewish Committee. Interesting to note that in 2008, Argentine Prosecutor Alberto Nisman fully informed the Supreme Court about this case. But not the Supreme Court of Argentina. He went to Tel Aviv, Israel, to inform the Supreme Court of the State of Israel about this case. Clearly, they work for the State of Israel. Just as Argentina is a financial colony of the global banking infrastructure, today we are a political colony of the State of Israel, Zionist organizations, and the United States. But as hunters, good hunters, we see all the signs. We see the false flags. We see the planted evidence. We see the media frenzy and permanent lying. As Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi, used to say, lie, 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 something will always remain. And the engineered confusion. There is no Iranian connection. There is an Israeli connection. That is the point that has to be seen. This is the same fingerprint, like the USS Liberty in June 1967, the Israeli Embassy in 1992, the Army in 1994, 9/11, the London attacks. Are we hunting the same beast? Do all roads lead to Zion?